Here is drawing ground from the Canadian Center for Economics and Foreign Health, Economic and Technology Assessment Collaborative. That's why it's on a different day, and I'm so glad to see everybody here. We are very happy that we got Prof Anirban Basu today. He's in town, and so it all worked out perfectly. So Anirban has a background in biostatistics and economics, and he's in public policy-related work. He's a professor at the Department of Health Services at the School of Public Health. He's also affiliated with the Pharmaceutical Outcomes Research and Policy Program. His appointment at the Department of Economics, and he runs his own shop, which has a nice abbreviation scheme, Program of Health, Economics, and Outcomes Methodology, and all that at the University of Washington. Before that, he was in Chicago, I think many of you may remember him from that time. And so we'll hear about his research today, which focuses generally on methods and applications that study observed and unobserved heterogeneity and trend on economic outcomes, and attempts to establish the value of individualized care. So he has worked in all kinds of things. He told us earlier today, which is obvious from his publications, that he really loves methods research. And so he has contributed a lot in many areas, paradigm effectiveness, public effectiveness research. Many of us read all his papers on modeling how to extend the data. What he was yes, most of the video read papers, so we passed the test, even come to the ranks today.
There we go.
He has won numerous awards and has done many great things in his life.
Thanks, THETA.
Welcome, Anirban. And so before we start, we do the same thing as last year. Everybody please introduce yourself. Say where you're from, I guess. And make sure. What do I want to know? Yes, I'm the Alexander. I'm scientist with Public Health Australia. I'm an assistant professor at IHTM, which is the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation. Joanne, thank you. I'm a PhD student at IHTM in health policy.
I'm Walter Lotus, and I'm an associate professor at My name is Adam Townsend. I'm a PhD student at the School of Economics.
Therese Ducal, I'm a biostatistician, health services researcher at ISIS and ICM.
Welcome, Ryan. I'm the IT architect for the THETA team.
I'm Natasha Smith, research associate at THETA.
Elisa Haika, research associate at THETA.
I'm Alexandra, I'm a research analyst at THETA and a senior PhD student at HPM.
I am Lauren Belmora. I'm a second year Master of Public Health Epidemiology student.
My name is Andrew Lamb. I'm an epidemiology student at the School of
I'm Laura Wells, I'm a PhD candidate at HPM.
And Mariana, epidemiologist at Public Health Ontario.
Hi, this is Patrick, also an FD at PHO.
My name is Edward. I'm also an FD at PHO.
I'm Courtney Ward. I'm an associate professor of economics at Dalhousie University.
Oh, nice.
I'm Mariana Hogan. I'm a PhD student at faculty department.
I'm Yasmin Saeed. I'm a master's student at faculty pharmacy.
Where from?
Glenn Fairclough, PhD student at THETA. Eastern Montreal.
George Summers, a biostatistician at Charge Hospitals and IHPM.
I'm Pedro Rivaldo. I'm a head of
Hi, my name is Wanjiri Chitwanawatrai. I'm a health economist at St. Michael Hospital and an assistant professor at IHU.
All right.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Mercer. I'm the Archivist Manager at Center Care Ontario.
Oh, nice.
Thanks, everybody. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's great to see such a interdisciplinary crowd today. So we'll see how this talk goes. I'm happy to take questions as I go along. You don't have to hold your questions to the end. I mean, it will be much more, I think, interactive and informative if we kind of have a discussion as we go along. So this is a paper joined with, as you can see, Andrew Jones at the University of York and Pedro at Sussex. And usually, I haven't done much work in education. Most of my work has been in health. But this opportunity came in and we started looking at really the impact of education in health. And as you know, there is a very large literature that has established that there is a positive effect of kind of years of schooling on long-term health. Most of the literature is based on associations, kind of adjusted effect, but there is some evidence of causality in there that kind of looked at that the more years you stay in school, it has, well, there's a well-established literature in the labor economics about income gradient and stuff, but there is also some literature on the health gradient. And more recently, there's work with Gabriella Conti, who would actually be here, actually already reached here because she's discussing a paper in the conference. And worked with Heckman to actually push those kind of methods to look at distributional implications for years of schooling. For example, going beyond the mean effects and really looking at who benefits and who does not, and what the policy implications and the distributions are. Also recently, I mean, this literature that I talked about mostly focused on the quantity of schooling, the years of schooling. The most recently, there has been some evidence that also the type and the quality of schooling matters. So what kind of school you go to does have some effects on health. Although again, some of these are not really done to disentangle cause and effect, but at least there's some associations. But there is not much work done on the distributional effects or the policy of the type of schooling effects on the distribution of health. And so our goal was to look at do health outcomes respond to type of schooling, and how do they vary across the population, in the population, and do it in a more causal kind of structure. So what we do is we exploit a major policy reform that happened in the 60s and 70s in England and Wales. And this is kind of the same kind of idea that many other people have used in this literature, looking at the causal effect of some shock in the system of education and looking at long-term health. So in the 1960s and 70s, we have the comprehensive educational reform. And what it did was it kind of passed a reform to make the selective system of schooling, and I'm going to describe what that means, transform into a comprehensive school. And the idea was to reduce the inequality of opportunity that was driving that selective school system. So under the selective school system, prior to the 1960s, children at age 11 had to take a test. And if you pass that test, they were allowed to go and enroll in a grammar school, which was supposed to be more academically oriented. They go on for age 18, and they were like trained to do more higher education. And if they didn't pass that test, they were sent to secondary modern schools, where it was not as much academically challenging. It was vocationally oriented training and typically covered ages 11 to 16. And usually what literature has shown that they have limited chances of progressing to higher education. And so this was thought to be a dampening effect on the equality of opportunity at that time. And so in the 1960s and 60s, I think, they passed the reform where they would move to more comprehensive schooling system during that period. And what they did was they abolished the test at age 11, and then they developed these new schools, which are actually, they transformed some of the old schools into this new program where everybody can enroll. Now, within the school, there was ability streaming, so there were like classes with different abilities, but still they were in the same school together, and so naturally resulted in a mixing of ability in those schools. Now, so here is a description of some of the school system at that time. Is this thing a little blurry? No? It's okay? Maybe I'm too close to it. Yeah. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, okay. So, there was 6% of the population that actually went to private schools, and we do not look at them in this data. So there were 40%, so 40% actually went to the selective schooling system in 1974, and this was measured at age 16 in our data of the kids. So they have already made the selection at age 11. And among the 40%, some went to grammar school and some went to secondary model, and then there are others where they went to the comprehensive school, the non-selective school. As you can see, by 1974, the reform was passed, but not everything has shifted to the whole. Everybody has transformed to the comprehensive system. There's always this mix of comprehensive schools and selective schools that still coexisted for several years. And as you can see, we would exploit that to get our kind of identification of effects. So our goal is to estimate the causal effect of alternative schooling system. We are not looking at particular school, but these two systems on long-term health and behaviors. And before I talk about the data, I just wanted to kind of briefly go over some of the reasons why we think looking at that is important. One could say that, the changes of school setting, why it would affect long-term health, maybe because the teacher quality is different between the two schooling systems. Although it turns out that the teacher quality distribution were very similar between the comprehensive and the non-comprehensive schools. Obviously, the comprehensive schools was an amalgamation of both the schools, types of school, but the distribution was very similar. Was there an increase in class size? Because there's a literature which has shown that class size affects outcomes, and the data shows, and this is the private school, so we removed that. The grammar school, secondary model, and comprehensive schools have very much similar distribution. The grammar schools is a little wider, but otherwise they have very similar distributions. The other thing, about curriculum change, whether what they are teaching in class under the new schooling system is very different, what has been established is that obviously the comprehensive school was more academic than the secondary model, but less academic than the grammar school. So there was somewhere in between. But the comprehensive schools also had more health education in it. So that affects, that has a unidirectional effect on long-term health behavior and health outcomes is not clear. There are two other things that stands out, which we think might be important. The first one is the mixing of students. Now, there's not much literature on this area, but the idea that lower ability kids, when they are in close proximity with higher ability kids, what the outcome would be, it's not clear, but it could have a potential impact. Although we think that if there is an impact, we would see it in very early adulthood, because that's the time where the influence is more newer and remain newer. The other hypothesis we have is that and this comes more from the economics literature on ability signals, is that what comprehensive school does is it kind of gives them everybody the equality of opportunity, but it also mutes the signal of their own ability. So when they graduate from high school, they are not exactly sure how able they are because they have all come out of the same school. As they enter the labor market and stay in the labor market, they kind of know or learn about their own abilities over time. So this is the muted ability syndromes, which kind of there's an ability gap catching up hypothesis that can happen. But it's also true, and if you look at the Heckman literature, that ability might not play any part in any of this in affecting health. It might be really, or at least the cognitive ability doesn't play any part. It might be the non-cognitive abilities that's driving all these results in the long term. So we're going to come back to these discussions and kind of once we see the results and kind of think of what might be going on. So the data comes from the National Child Development Study, which was a cohort of nearly 17,000 individuals, all born in the same week, in March of 3rd, 1958. So they They went around England and Wales. Everybody who was born in that week was then followed over their lifetime. Fascinating data. And there were interviews conducted in 65, 69, and going forth up to age 46. So, 1958 they are born. 1964 or 74, when they're age 16, is where we measure their schooling status in the secondary school. Although they have chosen the school at age 11, we measure their schooling status at age 16 because that's where we have the data. But the previous literature says that there's not much churning that go once you've selected the system. They stay within that. So we have a lot of background characteristics based on the first three waves from both, from parental characteristics, their health, and everything going forward. And then after they have comprehensive schools in the wave 4 to 7, we measure a lot of their health behavior and health of these people, and especially we measure them at age 23, age 33, and age 42. And so we're going to see all of those effects in long term. So kind of the study design and the variables. So we are interested in kind of getting the effect of secondary school system, which actually they give tests at age 11 and they choose the secondary school at age 12. And then you have a host of background characteristics, the family SAS, family childhood health. Cognitive ability is measured at test scores at age 11. And then there is this non-cognitive ability, which I was going to talk about, is measured by this Bristol Social Adjustment Scale at age 11 that has been shown to be predictive of certain problem behavior. And then there's other characteristics, schooling and local characteristics at age 11. And the outcomes we're going to look at, and there are a lot of outcomes, but mostly we are focusing on adult health. And so we're going to focus on depression, which is based on some Malaise score, long-standing illnesses, if they have any long-standing illnesses, and the self-assessed health. And we're going to also look at the effect of smoking and kind of try to see if there's a epidemiologic, I mean, obviously there's an epidemiologic literature which has linked smoking to these diseases, and we're going to see if some of the effects on illnesses can be explained by the effects on smoking, and so on and so forth. Okay, questions so far? Okay, all right. So here is the two main ability. Yeah.
So presumably these education reforms are not done for the purposes of improving health. I mean, this is a
No.
second order effect.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's a second, but it was an unintended effect, I would say. Yeah.
So are you going to? So what was the primary goal of
The-
these? So it was like to enhance social mobility or reduce.
Yeah. I think the primary goal was to improve equality of opportunity. So there was.
These outcomes sort of track on to that.
So people have looked at education, and people have shown that overall they have failed to do much. Well, so everybody graduates, kind of from the comprehensive school, kind of, and so there is some effects on education compared to the selective system. But labor market outcomes are not, they haven't found much big effects. Right. But obviously, the fact that, I mean, I don't know how you measure it, the fact that everybody is getting the similar kind of opportunity for education is something that's...
Like, for example, the switching between streams, like, educational mobility might be kids that are streamed initially at sort of a low level, and then, again, I don't...
Yeah, within the school, they might be moving, and I don't know how much churning that happens within the school, but there is ability streaming, yeah, absolutely. Right, and so one of the things is that, and which will be consistent with our results later, is that, some of the ability effects is being, washed away because there is streaming within the two systems, yeah. We have, you mean this one? This is the density of the scores, yeah, it's kind of norm, but this is the ability, the cognitive ability scores was based on the test scores at age 7. No, because I think that data was not available because some of the people were going to comprehensive who did not have those scores because that was at age 11, right? So the earliest we or the latest we have for them, where we have the scores for everybody, is age 7, right? Because age 11, some of them don't take the test because they don't have to go to selective system, or they choose not to go to the selective system, right? Right. So that's why we have age. I think age. This is not age 11, age 7, and then this Bristol Social Adjustment Guide. It's a guide that have been shown to kind of measure behavioral disturbances of children in school, and that's a score. Now, interestingly, the high score on the cognitive ability score means that they are cognitively better, whereas high score in the BSAG means they're non-cognitively challenged, or so high score means bad, and yeah. So the outcomes, what we did was we kind of looked at mental health in adulthood, and we used the Malaise Index, which was one element of the. There was a questionnaire of Cornell Medical Index questionnaire, and we used depression as a Malaise score greater than 7, which was also used by both the NCDS team and also other researchers in this field. And this has been also linked to well-being, happiness, literature in work and stuff like that. So that's one of our primary outcome. The other outcome was an indicator variable for long-standing illnesses, and sorry, this kind of broke down with the PDF conversion, but it has a lot of it has some what should I say congenital diseases, which I'm not sure why they kept it, but fortunately they're very small, so it shouldn't affect the results. But most of them are chronic illnesses which you can develop over time. And then finally, obviously, the self-assessment, self-assessed category, and so we have an indicator for excellent health and that we model. And finally, the behavioral outcome is the indicator for current smokers. So at any point in time, are you a current smoker or not? So that's what we are. That's our outcomes are. So as you know, we any estimation of this kind of work needs, especially if you want to do causal modeling. I mean, you can always run regressions and adjust for all your observed confounders, but there's always this challenge of figuring out who is enrolling in these different types of schools, and there is a selection going on. So that's why the selection into selection, basically. And so what we apply here is this. So many of you know about the instrumental variable literature. The instruments are these exogenous variables that you use to kind of instill exogenous variation in the treatment so that you can measure causal effects. But there's a large literature which shows that if there is heterogeneity in effects, instrumental variable can give you very uninterpretable results because they are local treatment averages. And so there's a line of work primarily done by Heckman, which have extended this methods to look at local instrumental variable methods where you estimate a marginal treatment effect. So the marginal treatment effect is this hypothetical treatment effect for a person who is at the margin of choice between two treatments. And the margin of choice is defined by whether their observed characteristics balances with the unobserved characteristics. So that's kind of a hypothetical treatment effect. And in this paper, what I did was extend that and say, well, you know, I don't want to know the effect of a hypothetical person. I really want to know the effect of a person that's in my sample. So all I do is kind of, I say for each person, I know which margins they belong to based on their choice, and I kind of integrate the marginal treatment effects to get a person-centered treatment effect. I think the advantage of a person-centered treatment effect paradigm is that, you know, you get a treatment effect for every person in your sample. And then you can average it to get the average treatment effects, but you can actually look at a lot of distributional issues, and not only on the same outcome, but for different outcomes for the same person, and see, you know, a person who is benefiting from one treatment on one dimension, is he losing out in the other dimension or not? So there's all sorts of things you could do with it. And so I'll briefly talk about the instrument that we use. So in this case, the instrument that we used was the penetration of comprehensive schools by different local educational authorities. in England and Wales. So the only thing we found is that there are some local authorities, about 20% of the population, where the penetration was near 100%. And those areas looked very different than all the other areas in the country, in the countries. And so we actually drop local educational authorities that where penetration have already by 1974 or by 1969 when they actually enter secondary school is already at 100. So we kind of drop 20% of the sample based on that. So we drop about 88 percentile. But then all the remaining one, we kind of exploit the variations across local educational authorities to look at who actually enrolls in comprehensive versus selective. And I'll show you some results about those. I don't know how much I should go into this, but I'll be happy to answer questions. Again, the PET theoretical background is there's an individual treatment effect, and the marginal treatment effect is really obtained by digressing or getting the partial derivative of the outcomes with respect to the propensity score, which is a function of the instrument. So that's what the marginal treatment effect is. And then, in the PET effect, you just take those marginal treatment effects and average over the margins for every individual. And there is a THETA code out there. I have a THETA journal paper also in review, and so if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share that. And these are some explanations on how you do it. So let's go in the results. And so we started off in the NCDS cohort with 16,000 patients, and obviously we dropped the private schools. We dropped the comprehensive penetration rate greater than 80%, right? And so basic exclusion, after the basic exclusions, we had about 13,000. But then we had missing covariate values for about, as of any long-term survey, about 9,000, about 10,000 patients. We just, there's a lot of missing values. And if we do deletion, I mean, we could have done multiple imputation, but that, there's pros and cons of doing it. So what we decided is that we would do line-wise deletion, and we will look at complete case scenarios where we have information on, and there were 3,400 that had complete cases. And but we didn't just leave it at that. We really compared the people who we dropped from our analysis and to those who we did not. So in the next table, it's excluded 9,900. If you compare all their characteristics, and these are all the characteristics that we controlled for, we see differences. And people who we dropped are significantly likely to have less ability, cognitive ability, and higher or lower non-cognitive skills. They are also less likely to where their parents say that they want to stay their kids in school and stuff like that. Yeah. So what are the implications of this? So I think at this point, I'm going to come back to this table. And based on the results, because we are dealing with heterogeneity, we can make some inferences about what this exclusion means for our overall result. Because we can then say, dropping people with lower cognitive ability, what does it mean for the overall result? So I'm going to come back to this. But just so you know that people who are excluded are different from those who are included in the analysis. These are the unadjusted levels of the three scores, depression, and obviously the comprehensive, the long-standing illness was increasing over time. Depression was also kind of increasing, and self-assessed help was decreasing over time. And there was not much difference across the two treatment groups, but I'm going to show some differences later on in terms of their characteristics. And I think this is the table where we see that there are about 1,600 kids in the selective school and 1,800 in the comprehensive school. Not a very big sample size, but we don't find much differences. There is difference in the non-cognitive ability, but it was not significant in the p-value. And the only significant difference in the univariate comparison came out in the cognitive ability score. Or the cognitive test scores, which makes sense because I think people who are going to the comprehensive schools are more likely to be drawn from the secondary modern than the grammar schools. And so on average, you would expect them to have some difference in the cognitive ability schools. The last column actually compares the same covariates, but not across schooling, but across the median of our instrumental variable. This kind of gives you some notion that even though these confounders, the risk factors, are different between the two treatment groups, they are not different across the instrumental variable, which kind of gives you some sense that the instruments are able to balance some of the observed covariates and likely to do so for the unobserved too. I mean, that's the idea behind this. And this is the result from the first stage of an IV regression. So in the first stage in IV regression, you regress your treatment choice as a function of your instrument and other covariates. And so even in a multivariate setting, you find that cognitive ability is still significantly predictive of treatment school choice, school system choice. But the IV is also very significant. Their statistic is 83, which kind of signifies a very strong IV. And if you predict the probability of choosing comprehensive versus selective school system, and you plot them, you see the distribution of propensity score in these two groups. Ideally, you would want this propensity score to go all the way from 0 to 1, which should give you better results later on. But in this case, this is what we have, going from 0.2 to 0.95 about. Okay. Questions? Yes. No. No. Right.
I had a question about the measures that were taken a couple of graphs ago. It showed at age 23. I'm wondering if that data is available when they were 16, because that was that one.
Yeah. So.
So those are outcome measures of health, and if they were taking their score at 16, their academic score at 16, I'm wondering if they asked them if they smoked at age 16 or if that's
Right. So I think there was no academic score so I have academic scores at age 11 and age 7.
Okay.
And 16 is where we observed them which school they went to, right? And I don't recall we have health measurements at 16, but we have health measurements at age 11, right? And I'm going to show you results on that. Because what that does is, I think it helps us, it serves as a falsification test, that you wouldn't expect to find differences right away, right? So I'll show you that. Yeah. Right. So this is where. So this is what you were talking about. So Pischke and Manning actually, So one of the previous attempts to look at this, not for health, for other outcomes, is that they have used Labour Party or kind of political affiliation as an instrument. And Pischke and Manning kind of criticized that and saying that, well, it's not a good instrument, and I'll show you it's not a good instrument, because if I run that instrument and my outcome is, this health at age 11, it still produces some significant effects or some effects which you shouldn't expect, because so we did that same test, and as you can see, we did find that there was no significant, not only non-significant difference, but even the point estimates were almost zero. And we kind of did some sensitivity analysis with that, and kind of, so we are more confident that this instrument might be reasonable instrument to use. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. So the other thing that happens, so now you're trying to estimate the treatment effect going forward, age 23 now. Now, as is general survey, obviously we dropped a lot of people because there are a lot of missing values. But then there is, even if there are all baseline values present, there is attrition over time, right? And so one of the things to figure out if there is selective attrition over time. So what we did was, so what this figure is for at age 23, I've plotted the effects for every person in this distribution. And the reason some are red and some are black is because for reds are the ones that have no missing value. They continue to be in the survey in the next period. But the blacks are the one which drops out, right? And we want to see if the distribution is separate, right? Which would indicate that there is selective attrition going on. And it turns out that the distribution kind of overlaps quite a bit. So we were not so much worried about selective attrition. So in terms of results, what we found was that the depression, the effect, the average effect of depression, because of comprehensive schools was 0 in the initial age 23, but actually increased to 9 percentage points and 14 percentage points. Although they did not reach significance. They are not significant, but there's some evidence that the effect of smoking, that comprehensive schools is responsible for increase in the probability of smoking, probability of depression, in this case, over time as they age. Although the ATEN was not significant. And the treatment effect on the treated and the untreated was not significant too, and we have a obviously good explanation of why that's the case. But they were similar to the average treatment effect. So we don't find that there was any selection based on games that's going on in this literature. So they can anticipate that we would get harmed by comprehensive school, and that's why they are shying away from it. That's not happening. So overall, the average treatment effect shows that if you were to send everybody to comprehensive schooling, there is potential that the probability of depression could increase in the population. Similarly, we found long-standing illnesses and effect of self-assessed health. Long-standing illnesses kind of increased in the middle and stayed. There was a positive effect, but self-assessed health increased by age 33, but then decreased by age 42. But none of the average effects reached significance, right? And so, in some traditional way, you would think this is a null study, null result, and we would stop there. But I think one of the purpose of this analysis was to also look at distributional issues and figure out, are there people, even if the average results are null, are there people who are benefiting or getting harmed from it? So this graph plots the effect of comprehensive school, effects, not the levels, the effects at age 23 on depression, here on the x-axis, and for the same person, age 42 is the y-axis. So this person would have this person would have a 0.5 percentage points, 50 percentage point effect here at age 23, would have a negative percentage point effect in age 42 for the same person because of the comprehensive school. As you can see, most of the effect is kind of clustered around the northwest quadrant, and some on this side, which means that that most of the people, about 90% of the people, have some positive effect of increasing depression due to comprehensive schooling, and there is a persistence, there's a positive correlation between age 23 and age 42. So people who are likely to be hurt on the depression side with comprehensive schooling kind of is consistent over time. And in fact, if you look at the different symbols are by different significance, and what we found, about 31% have significant detrimental effect at either age 23 or 42 because of comprehensive schooling. Now, not all 31% actually went to comprehensive schooling, right? So this is the whole idea of the counterfactual, is that I am actually getting the effect for every person in the sample, even if they had attended different schooling system. Right? So 31% have detrimental effect in terms of probability of depression. The next one we studied was the effect on smoking, to kind of try to explain what's going on here. And the smoking unadjusted level, obviously smoking was decreasing over time, but the people going to comprehensive schools had much higher smoking levels than going to selective school system. And when we do the analysis, we find that the smoking actually, the probability difference, because the effect of comprehensive school was bigger in the middle at age 23. But went to 0 at age 42. So the effect was not was almost 4% or 5% by age 42. But again, for our interest, we really want to see, are those people who increase smoking are the ones who are getting hurt on the depression scale. And so what we do is we plot the effects of smoker at age 23 against the effect of depression, or in this case, long-standing illness, because there is more direct link of smoking and long-standing illness at age 42. And we see there is some positive trends going on, and mostly about 60% of people who have effect of smoking or increased smoking at age 23 also have higher probability of effect of long-standing illness at age 42. So that kind of goes along with our intuition that smoking might be one channel through which comprehensive schooling affects health behaviors and health outcomes in the long run. Finally, we kind of try to identify who is really being affected here, right? So we know there are some people who are getting affected, but what are their characters? You know, what are their characteristics? What are their risk factors? So one of the things we thought, based on our hypothesis, that it must be driven by ability, because we are mixing two groups of people together, and in the comprehensive schooling, there might be maybe the lower ability kids are getting hurt more because they cannot cope with the higher ability kids in the system. If you look at, so what we did was we looked at people who actually did not attend comprehensive school. So this is only the people who selected to attend selective school system, which is the control group in our analysis. But then within the control group, we know who attended selective secondary modern versus grammar. And we know that the grammar schools people have much more higher ability than the secondary modern. So we looked at the effect. Had they gone to comprehensive schools, what would be the effect be for these two groups of people? And we see that the effects are bigger for people who went to secondary modern, but they're not significantly different from the effects of those people who are going to grammar schools too. So both grammar school students and the secondary modern students seems to have this average effect on depression because of the had they gone to comprehensive schools. So which kind of suggests that maybe ability may not be the driver of these effects that we see, or at least cognitive ability may not be the drivers. So the next one, what we do is we do a kind of a forward selection algorithm for the effects. So we have the estimated PET effects and kind of see, what is it that explains that variation. So we identify only this, the group of people who actually had significant effect at age 42 and create an indicator. And just an aside, the significance at the individual level is also estimated through bootstrap. So you can bootstrap and then you can cluster bootstrap and then you can estimate a standard errors for each individual in the sample. So anyway, that was an aside. But so if you take those individuals which show evidence of a significant harm from comprehensive schools and create a 1-0 variable, then we kind of did a very as a forward-looking kind of it's a logistic regression, but a stepwise forward regression, and with a very stringent inclusion criteria, because we really wanted to keep things that are really, really significant, predicting these effects or predicting these significant effects. And what we find is that among all the characteristics, these characteristics stay in the model, and cognitive ability drops out of the model. So cognitive ability is not able. So among groups who are significantly hurt on depression scale versus not affected, the cognitive ability is not very different. But they are different in their non-cognitive ability, in the sense that if your non-cognitive ability score increases, that means you are more challenged in that scale. You are more likely to belong in that group that you're going to be negatively affected by comprehensive schools. Similarly, there are some other effects, like males actually come out to be highly significantly predicted. So the males are the ones who are getting more affected by. Now, we think that the reason males are getting affected because under the selective system, there are a lot of single-sex schools in that, where in the comprehensive schools, there's a lot of mixing of gender too that was going on. So this kind of also conforms to the idea that we do not see selection based on the outcomes, selection on gains, because the treatment effect on the treated was very different, equal to the average treatment effect. Because remember, the selection was mostly driven by ability, right? And what's happening is that it's non-cognitive ability which is actually causing the problems. So we don't see that difference. So overall, I think what we found was the average impacts of comprehensive increased smoking prevalence at peak at age 33, and increased probability of depression at 33 and 42, but these effects do not reach significance on average. But there is considerable variation in these person-centered treatment effects, and these effects are persistent within individuals over time. In fact, if all kids were sent to comprehensive schools, we find that about 50% of individuals would have a significant increase in the probability of long-standing illness or depression at some point in their adulthood. So even if the average effect is not significant, it seems to me that there is a distributional issue that ought to be important in these cases. And what I think is the most relevant finding for our case is that people who are significantly worse off on depression score at 42 due to comprehensive schools are those who had lower cognitive abilities at age 11 and males. So that kind of has interesting implications, which I'll come to. So any questions on the findings? Yes.
I'm wondering whether the cognitive abilities are related in a linear way with the depression score, or whether a different kind of, maybe a different relation might exist that is non-linear. So like maybe people with very high cognitive abilities might be more likely to have depression.
Right. So in the PET effect, so it's not the relationship between cognitive and non-cognitive score that you're concerned about. You're concerned about the relationship between outcomes and cognitive and non-cognitive scores, I guess, right? But the non-linearity between different dependence between cognitive and non-cognitive scale doesn't matter because they are on the same side of the equation. Right. Outcomes, right? Yeah. So the PET effect actually, fits a very nonlinear model. It has all interactions, plus it kind of goes through goodness of fit tests, kind of to see that it fits the data very well. So I think those nonlinearity issues have been covered. Now, having said that, if you really kind of pushed hard and kind of looking at small effects, probably could be. I mean, we did not. If a small fraction of very high cognitive kids are driving this result, at least in the forward, because we have a very complex nonlinear function, at least in the forward stage kind of stepwise regression, they would have picked up that variation or explained some significant part of the variation. But it drops out of the model, so kind of shows me that that's not driving most of the variation in the PET effects. Yeah. I'll tell you what the limitations are. I mean, obviously, we had missing values. And this is interesting because if you now go back to the missing value table, like people excluded table due to missing values, we saw people who excluded have lower ability, lower cognitive ability, and lower non-cognitive skills, right? Which would, and now lower cognitive ability does not affect our results, but lower cognitive skills means these results are based on people who have on average higher non-cognitive skills. So our results are conservative to some extent. That if you had really looked at data for the entire population, we would think that the effects would have been bigger. Even the average effects could have been bigger. Okay. Attrition, we didn't find it to be consequential, but obviously we did not unfold all the mechanisms through which we see these effects or these people who are getting affected. The one mechanism we saw was a smoking behavior, that somehow people take up smoking at age 33, and that kind of is linked to the effects on long-standing illnesses at age 42, which kind of goes well with the epidemiologic literature. But why they are picking up smoking at age 33 is not very clear. IV is kind of we think it's believable. We'll see what the reviewers say. But I think it has important implications because I don't know about Canada, but US has primarily been a mixed ability environment, and for many cases, although there is ability streaming. And what our results suggest is that there may be attention required, attention needed for children which have been shown with lower non-cognitive skills in mixed ability schools. And that could be beneficial over time. And obviously much work is needed about what type of attention that one needs to give, and more work is to be done. And obviously future work involves kind of seeing effects on other behaviors. So we have data on vegetable intake, consumption of fried food, alcohol drinking. Although there's a lot of missing values in these kind of, which doesn't give a full picture. And we're going to do some work on education too, but other people haven't found much effect there. Yeah. Oh, questions? Other questions? Yeah. Ah, that's a good question. I don't, well, so in the 1980s and 90s when these were taken, I don't think there were a lot exercise measurements were done at that point. I mean, in the UK on this data, because diet and exercise. It's interesting. I was surprised the consumption of fried food was there, because that's where I'm like really maybe they're so used to fried food, maybe mushy peas and whatever that battered fried. But yeah, exercise was not a kind of a. Yeah, maybe they'll have one of the latest, age 46, the last survey, they would have exercise, and we'll take a look, definitely. Other questions? Yeah?
So in medical literature, whenever you do a kind of a historical comparison, something that happened prior to some event, something that happened after some event, one is always concerned about secular changes in medical practice. What else is happening that changes the care over time. So it seems to me that this is kind of analogous in the sense that you've got something that has happened at a particular historical period of time, and so your comparison of the two cohorts prior to and after this historical event may potentially be affected by secular changes in society with respect to diet, prevalence of health, and other things like that. I'm just wondering if this kind of comparison can deal with those kind of secular changes.
Well, so I think your question is, can we take these causal effects and what does it mean for the today's cohort, right? Because the analysis is exactly the same time for the two cohorts. Remember, these are all people who were born in the same week in 1958. So they went to school at the same time, but they went selected different systems. So the effects doesn't have any temporal patterns, right? But you take these effects and say, well, these are the effects for these people that went through the whole 70s, right? So how generalizable are they to today? And that's why I think the heterogeneity analysis becomes important, because then at least you can condition on all these risk factors today, which can have a different distribution and get a different effect. Yeah. Yeah.
I went to a conference with 1 year.
Oh, all right. I don't have the effect of 1 year of comprehensive school, so I can't share. Yeah.
It was 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So the selected group includes the secondary modern students and the grammar school
Yeah.
students, and the other group is sort of
all comprehensive.
together.
Yeah.
So, I think there are 3 groups rather than 2.
Well, so.
I'd expect before you went to the results that maybe they would have worse health outcomes like going to a combined system, whereas everyone's might have been, but you're moving sort of both into a common ground.
Right. 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 Yeah, because our goal was not to see the effect of secondary modern versus grammar, because that was a selection that's ingrained in the system. Our goal was to compare two systems, right? So on one system, they have the choice to, sort themselves out, and the other system, there is no choice to sort themselves out, right? And that's why we look at overall selective system, where people are sorting into different schools, and the comprehensive system where, now, once we get an individual effect, we kind of see how the effects vary by the people who went to grammar, and we see that the effects are slightly bigger for those who went to secondary modern, but not significantly more than grammar school.
even the ones with the grammar schools suffer. What is
Exactly. Exactly. And which tells us that it's not the cognitive ability driven effect, it's the non-cognitive ability, which could be, in both the schools, both kind of schools. Yeah. Other questions? Any questions on the methods? They come after. Okay. I don't know if I've exhausted all the time or it's 2:30. Perfect time.
Yeah, perfect time.
Yeah.
So if there are no more questions, I'll let you conclude your round. Thanks, Anirban.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.